The next presenter is Stefanie Colombo. Stefanie Colombo, Dalhousie University's Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Aquaculture Nutrition, directly impacts Canadian farmed seafood by developing novel solutions in fish nutrition. Through development of environmentally sustainable feeds, her work is helping minimize aquaculture's environmental footprint and maximize nutritional benefits for the fish and consumers. She is fundamentally influencing the food Canadians eat, increasing omega-3 content in salmon fillet for the benefit of consumers.
Hi everyone, it's an honor to be here, and I'm really excited to be a new member of the college for the next 7 years. And it's been really exciting to hear the last session of presentations, a diversity of research areas, and so I was happy for the opportunity to talk about my area of research, which is in aquaculture nutrition, with a focus on sustainable and nutritious seafood. So I'm going to just talk a little bit of an overview on aquaculture in general, and then I'll talk a little bit about how my research fits into that. So the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations comes out with a report every 2 years on the state of the world's fisheries and aquaculture. And their latest report is really a call to action for the blue transformation, which is really a call for transforming our food systems, particularly our aquatic food systems, and how that contributes to our overall food production. And so these are the latest statistics from that report. So currently about 49% of our total seafood production is actually from aquaculture. So that's approaching about half of what we produce is from farmed fish and shellfish. And also consider that currently about 2/3 of our wild fish stocks are considered sustainable. So we can harvest from those fish stocks and they will naturally replenish themselves. That also means that about 1/3 of our wild fish stocks are considered overexploited. And that's changed a lot since the 90s, the early 90s, where about 90% of our fish stocks were considered sustainable and healthy. So this is a huge problem. Now, the FAO also predicts that in the next 7 years, we'll be eating more seafood. In fact, we'll be eating about 15% more seafood than we are now. And so that means it really is a call to action for aquaculture to increase their production. So the FAO predicts that aquaculture production will need to increase by about 40% in the next 7 years. That is a huge task. And so our total fish consumption since the 90s, when they first started producing this data, has increased a lot. In fact, right now, about 3 billion people around the world every day eat seafood as their main source of protein. And that's increasing. So from the last 30 years, there's been an increase in fish consumption by about 120%. We also know that we are overexploiting our fisheries. There's overfishing as a problem. So our fish production from wild fish catch has only increased by about 14%. It's pretty steady considering how much more we're taking from the ocean. So there's a mismatch in supply and demand. So during that 30-year period, aquaculture increased by over 500% to try to meet that demand for fish protein. And so this graph is actually from that latest FAO report, and what you're looking at is total fish production on the y-axis in million metric tons over time, starting at about 1950 to the latest data around 2018. So what you're seeing, that increase is the total amount of fish that we're harvesting. Now the orange, like the light orange and the dark orange, that's how much we're catching from wild fish. And you can see around 1990, you see that levels off. We're not harvesting any more wild fish, really. Well, it's actually about 14% increase since 1990. But you see how that levels off. From about 1990 to 2018, the blue is increasing, and that's from marine and freshwater aquaculture. So you can see at the latest data point at 2018, the fish that we're harvesting from aquaculture and wild is about half. So in the next 7 years, we'll be approaching 9 billion people, and the FAO predicts that we'll need 230 million metric tons of seafood. And right now we're at about 180. So that kind of aligns with the statistic that the FAO presented that aquaculture will need to increase by about 35–40%. In the next 7 years, 60% of our seafood will come from aquaculture. So aquaculture really is a necessary part of our food security and of our seafood production. And we have to do this in a sustainable way that has minimal environmental impacts and is resilient for many things, particularly climate change. So for me and my research area, the increase in aquaculture is going to mean an increase in the feed that we produce to grow those fish. So it's critical to source sustainable feeds that are very nutritious and highly functional, that has minimal impacts on the environment. And that's where my research comes in. So the aquaculture industry is faced with a lot of urgent priorities or challenges. And some of those were discussed this morning. So fish health and survival, waste mitigation, feed resources, environmental impacts and emissions, and climate change. And a lot of these issues are no different than any issues faced by the livestock agriculture industry. Aquaculture is no different to that. So food is a necessity, and we need to produce the food in a most manageable and sustainable way as possible. So considering all of these priorities, one of the reasons why I really like the area of aquaculture nutrition is that there is a solution in each of these issues that nutrition can address. It's not a smoking gun solution. It's more like a tool in the toolbox of how, we could piece together some of the solutions to these challenges. And so understanding the role of nutrition is really important, because innovations and new discoveries in this area can help with each of those challenges in some way. And so the priority really is to produce safe and nutritious food while maintaining environmental sustainability. And my research is kind of along this natural food chain of, the nutrients that we're providing the fish need to be environmentally sustainable, but they also need to provide the nutrient requirements that the fish need so that the fish are, thriving, growing well, healthy, able to mount a good immune response, things like that. And then considering that those fish that we grow actually become our food. So are we providing good nutrients that are stored in the fillets that then become our food, particularly considering some nutrients that are critical for our health, like the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, which play critical roles in our cardiovascular health and our brain development, our neurological function. And most of where we get those long-chain omega-3s are from seafood. So we need to make sure that the feed that we're feeding the fish ends up being food for us, that it's highly nutritious. These are some photos of trainees in my lab. I'm really lucky to have really passionate trainees in my lab that are just excellent people and are really focused on what they're doing and feel really passionate about our research goals, which are to improve aquaculture sustainability and production through new discoveries and innovations in nutrition. And really the overarching goal of all of this is to contribute toward healthier, sustainable seafood for our future. So some of the research themes that I work in, and I'll talk a little bit about each of these, are nutritional resources and functional feeds. The question about where do fish feeds come from in aquaculture came up this morning, so I'll talk a little bit about that, and it's a large part of what we do in my lab, is looking at what is the composition of the feed. And about 40 years ago, if you ask someone that question, they would say fish meal and fish oil, and that's harvested from wild fish stocks, which is a huge biodiversity and sustainability problem. But fast forward to now, there's been an evolution in the feed, and there's different types of feed out there. I mean, because some fish are carnivorous, they eat other fish, some are herbivorous, they eat plants, and some are somewhere in between as omnivorous fish. 40 years ago, they were mainly just giving them all fish meal and fish oil diets, which was problematic. obviously recognizing this as a problem, the industry shifted from using fish meal, fish oil based and said, well, what if we replaced some of the nutrients from fish meal and fish oil with something else more sustainable, like vegetable proteins and oils, like soybean oil and soybean protein concentrate. Sure, great. So a lot of research was going on in the 90s and early 2000s to do this. And they've done this. So imagine that the feed had about 70% fish meal and fish oil. The other 30% were things like wheat. You have to actually make the pellets, and vitamins and minerals, right? Now that looks more like 20% fish meal and fish oil, and the rest of it is mostly plant-based. So it's shifted immensely. But that is also a problem, actually, when we think about providing terrestrial plants to farmed fish. So in the past 5 years, there's been kind of a new school of thought and recognition that, okay, look, we could be using all of that arable land to grow crops that we should be eating, the fresh water, we should be using that. Why are we feeding that to farm fish? Well, there are other solutions. So what we're testing in my lab right now, and there is a shift in the industry going in this direction, is looking at insects, insect meals and oils. And when you farm insects, they actually can eat food waste, which is a huge global problem anyway. So we're actually feeding insect meal, like black soldier flies, to farmed salmon, and they do very well because in the wild, salmon and other fish normally eat insects and aquatic insects, so it's not a far stretch from naturally what they're doing. We're also looking at microalgae, so microalgae meals and oils can also use carbon stocks from other industries. So it's part of this circular bioeconomy framework that a lot of the new aquaculture feeds are tapping into, and this is really a promotion into more environmentally sustainable feeds. We're also looking at nutritional strategies as antibiotic alternatives. So when you're farming animals, and fish are no different, sometimes you do have to use antibiotics, and you don't want to have to do that. And so there are some nutritional ways using some ingredients that have really special bioactive properties that can mount better immune responses. So we're looking at some really highly functional ingredients like microalgae that are very high in antioxidants and other bioactive molecules that can help reduce the need for using antibiotics. My training as a graduate student was in this area, but I focused on fatty acid metabolism, and I'm still looking at that now. So how can we encourage salmon, for example, to make more of their own omega-3 fatty acids so that we don't have to provide as much in the diet? And also looking at what is the impact on the gene expression of the fish when we're feeding them different diets, because their gene expression is really kind of a microscope into looking how their metabolism is working. Also looking at impact of climate change on fish nutrition and health, particularly increasing water temperature, because the water around the fish affects their metabolism because they're ectotherms, so that's really important. And then also with all of these things, all of the tests that we do in my lab, we're always focus on how does that impact the nutritional quality of the fish that we're producing, because ultimately, we care about the health of the people that are eating the fish. So, for testing new ingredients, we always want to make sure about the biochemical composition of the fillets, and also the quality too. Does it look good? Does it taste good? Is this something that's going to be acceptable by Canadians? And there's all of these challenges in the aquaculture industry that the industry is being faced with, but one of the problems is really social perception in Canada anyway, and my time is almost up, so I'll skip through this really quickly. And I get asked the question a lot, what is the difference between wild salmon and farmed salmon? So we've done a lot of work on that and published a few studies on the nutritional difference, and it's really not whether it's wild or farmed, but it depends on the species, especially salmon. It's like comparing apples and oranges. And so I think it's important that the public kind of knows about what they're eating, so there's kind of a call for better labeling and traceability for the aquaculture industry. So really our lab is asking, how can aquaculture do better? How can we use less resources to make better food? How can we rely less on wild fisheries to improve ocean health? Improving the resiliency of aquaculture. And at the end of the day, we care about the nutritional value of the fish that's being produced. So how can we improve that?